Well, welcome again to everyone as we continue our way through Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Discipleship. We finished up. We finished up last week, pretty much everything in chapter 4. Um, but I don't know if there were any initial questions, comments from last week. So we wrapped up that pretty quickly toward the end. So I don't know if there was anything that anyone wanted to bring up before we jumped into new material. Okay. Of course, as always, if there are particular questions or concerns or anything as it comes up, please don't hesitate to unmute and mention it. Um, just real quickly, so at the end of this chapter, at the end of last week, we talked about what we hear in the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, where we're exchanging the burdens that we bear, giving them over to God and taking on the yoke of Jesus or the cross of Christ, as the case is. And so uh, toward the bottom of page 56, Bonhoeffer says, bearing the Christ does not bring misery and despair. Rather, it provides refreshment and peace for our souls. It is our greatest joy. Here we are, no longer laden with self-made laws and burdens, but with the yoke of him who knows us and who himself goes under us, goes with us under the same yoke. Under this yoke, we are assured of his nearness and communion. It is he himself whom disciples find when they take up their cross. So this is kind of, in some ways, when we're used to carrying something, we have uh, we kind of get accustomed to the weight, whatever it is, and then when we change it for something lighter, even though we're still carrying something, there's joy there now. There's a sense of peace there now because we are, we've exchanged it for something else, and so that's kind of what's happening, ideally with our walk with Jesus. We're carrying whatever burdens we're carrying, the normal things of our lives, our history, and now we exchange it for Jesus's burden, and it is lighter. It's a joy to carry this. And it sounds kind of strange on the front end, but it is an exchange of something that now fits us. It's kind of like even wearing an ill-fitting pair of shoes. We can get around in them, they work, but when we have a really good-fitting pair of shoes, one that supports our foot correctly, it's a joy now to wear these shoes. Whereas shoes were a drudgery before, now it's a joy. And so really, Bonhoeffer is saying that the burden that we carry, that we take from Jesus, it fits us, and it is really a joy to carry because we're not carrying it by ourselves. Jesus is with us, walking along with us, bearing a burden as well. And so, many hands make light work, as the saying goes. So now we're in it together. We're not feeling so alone. We're not having to struggle under our own burdens. And so we move forward with a sense of joy and of gratitude for traveling, again, not by ourselves, but with our Savior and with those who follow him. Um, so I think with that, we can jump over to chapter 5, unless there are any particular questions. Excuse me, as we ended chapter 4.
The sentence bearing constitutes being a Christian. Page 56.
Yes. And where are you? I'm sorry.
Right there where it says God is a God who bears.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then further down it says bearing constitutes being a Christian.
hmm Right.
And they talk about bearing other people's burdens.
Right. 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 Yeah. So part of being a Christian is the same part of following Jesus is bearing things. It's not, we're not footloose and fancy free going through life with no responsibilities and no concern for others. But we do have burdens to bear. And so but again, as he says further down, but Jesus is bearing them with us. So it's not that God is saying, okay, go do this work, and you must do it on your own.
It
Jesus is
also
right
says
on.
it constitutes their community with
Right.
Christ.
Exactly. Right. Right.
That's tough.
hmm it's well, yeah, it is tough because a lot of people don't carry their share.
They don't even want to bear your own burden.
Yeah, this is true.
How
This is
can you
true.
be, a party to someone else's burdens?
hmm hmm
That's
And
being
that's the truth.
honest.
That's the
hmm
truth.
It's very true. Yep, it's very true. Yeah, this is it would be lovely if, everybody um
Yeah,
was
that's when
as
you live in unity.
committed. Right. Right. But as you said, that's not always the case, or seems like in some ways never the case. Um, but I think there's the effort that's made. Um, we hope that we get closer to the get an approximation of what we need to do as we go along. And some situations, some times, seasons will be better than others, but we keep trying, I guess, for lack of a better term. Yes.
I don't see that as carrying the other person with. I see it as being a support for the person. Not that you will, like how Jesus took the cross and went to death for us and bore our sins. I don't see it as me taking on that person's burden, but just being there and supporting them, helping them to carry the burden.
Mm,
That's the way I look at it.
okay. Okay.
I was going to say the basically the same thing too, that it isn't always a case of you taking on the full burden that somebody else has to carry, but just being there as their support, which is basically what she just said. To be a support for somebody is uh, a mental support is just as good sometimes as a physical support.
hmm Right. Right. Yep.
So you have worry about them then.
Say again.
You have worry about them.
I wouldn't necessarily say worry. I would more
Worry.
say care. I would use the word care. You
hmm
care,
So you have
care,
care.
care and concern. Yes, you care for them, and you want to help, even though it might be just a situation of you, like for example, you just being there to listen to someone, listen to what they have to say, because sometimes a person just needs that, just needs for someone to be there to listen to what they have to pour out. That lightens their burden.
hmm Yep. Yep. And then, I mean, and then again, the ideal of this is that you're in a community where everyone is, striving for the same thing. And we know that that's not always the case, and sometimes it's not even often the case. But when we're working similarly, or where we spend a good bit of our time trying to be in unity with one another, trying to uh, you know, have this kind of mutual understanding of who we are as a community, then we begin to create some of those spaces where it does actually become the case, where there is genuine concern, care, there is genuine support for each other as we're going along, and it might not be as consistent as we would like, or it might not last as long as we would like, or it might not be exactly along the timeline that we would hope for. But we do find, throughout our lives in the community, the support that we need. Uh, or if not the support that we derive directly from the community, resources are available to help us find whatever the support is, however, whether it's tangible, intangible, long term, short term, whatever the case is, where we get, a piece of what we need, then to be able to get to the next step. So, um, but it does uh, take a willingness to follow Jesus, to obey what Jesus says, and then to ultimately to do what Jesus did. Excuse me.
So that last, the last on page 57, that last sentence, you
Hmm.
must not follow the work which you choose, not the suffering which you devise, but that which comes to you against your choice.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to understand it.
Hmm.
Is it saying that we make the wrong choices? That maybe the easy way out, maybe?
Hmm. I don't know. I would say that Bonhoeffer more there is saying that if, again, following on what his premise has been thus far, that what we are doing is based on what Christ needs for us to do. So we're not making a choice except to follow Jesus. And so the things that we suffer, the things that we do, the burdens that we bear, the places that we go, the plan that we follow, at least, in Bonhoeffer's understanding, and, in the premise of this book, is all of that comes from our following Christ. Um, and so, in many ways, we kind of had to test the call that we think we have. We kind of have to figure out, okay, is this just kind of what I want to do? And it won't necessarily be the easy way, as you were saying, Ms. Dillon, necessarily. But it will be a sense that, that I've made this choice. This is my choice. I'm doing this because this is the way that I deem to go. And Bonhoeffer is saying, and Jesus would say the same, I think. No, it's not your way. It's my way. It's not my will, but your will, oh God, as he prayed in the garden. So it's just really a work for all of us to continually be discerning. Okay, I'm going to do this good thing. I'm going to do this hard thing. I'm going to do this suffering thing. I'm going to do this sacrificial thing. I'm going to do this wonderful thing. This beautiful thing. But if I'm not doing it in obedience to what Jesus is calling me to do, then I'm still working in my own will, and uh, I haven't really given myself over to obeying Christ. And that's the struggle, again, in the context that Bonhoeffer is talking about, which we have talked about and we'll talk about all through the book. In the face of totalitarianism, in the face of the rise of the Third Reich, in the face of the established church, the Lutheran Church in Germany, cozying up to the powers that be, and for whatever reason, for favor, for protection, for power, whatever the rationale was. Bonhoeffer is trying to instruct people, or raise a different way to resist the lure of this kind of power, or the temptation of the cheap grace that he talks about. And so, in order to do that, at least for Bonhoeffer in this, and and others that you read about that were writing to this time, others that came through World War II, particularly in Germany. Um, you hear this, if we're not going to make the same mistakes, if we're not going to get tempted by power and prestige, or even by persecution in war, we're going to have to make sure that we're following Christ and doing what Christ did, and not, as leaning to our own understanding as we hear elsewhere. So again, this is really trying to drive home the point that if we're not completely obedient to Christ, if we're not following Christ closely, if Christ is not our highest joy, then we run the risk of getting off and making these kinds of decisions that are really more about our own will than they are about God's. And so, Bonhoeffer really wants, for his seminary students, but also for the larger public that might be wrestling with these same kinds of questions. Well, how do we combat, Hitler's regime? How do we stand against the evil that we see? And Bonhoeffer is saying, well, the first step is not to settle for cheap grace. The first step is to form yourself to the mind of Christ. The first step is to obey what Jesus says, to follow him. When he calls, you go, and not to try to figure it out logically or theologically or institutionally or politically, but just to go following Jesus, doing what Jesus tells you to do. Um, Discerning the specifics of Jesus' call on your life, and then as people of like minds come together, all discerning what it looks like, what it means for them to be obedient in this time or in whatever season they're in, wherever situation they find themselves. Then everybody doing the best that they can to do that, to follow that route. You see, the resistance come. You see the forces of darkness being stopped and pushed back and utterly defeated. And that's kind of the stark reality of this. And us reading that, yeah, the times are out of whack, and it feels like, complete chaos in a lot of ways. But what we're dealing with is not quite the same as what was happening in Nazi Germany at the time. And this was even just slightly before war had been declared. So, but in the run up to all of that, there's the question, okay, so what do we do? What do people of faith do? Are we only just going to capitulate to the power and go along with what's being done and try to live as normally as possible during this particular time? Or are we going to have the conversations about what it looks like as people that follow Jesus? How are we supposed to act and respond to what we see going on? And so, I mean, on some level, we have to keep that in our minds when we're discussing this, that there's some pretty stark choices happening, or before people of Germany at the time, that maybe it doesn't feel as pressing for us now, like it did for Bonhoeffer then, and like the way, the situation is happening in the world. And that kind of crisis has a kind of heightening effect and focusing effect and sharpening effect on how you would talk about your faith, or what it means to be a Christian, with that kind of a looming, well, actually not even looming, but a very present evil in front of you, and seeing people that you might have loved and respected and were colleagues going in that direction, because of whatever. Maybe they believe in it, or maybe they're scared that if they don't, they'll suffer the same fate, or they feel some kind of allegiance to the institution. So how are you going to have support for the institution, for that institutionalized church? Well, you side with the powers that be. Um, but again, all of this is coming out of that kind of seething cauldron of war and of evil in that particular manifestation of that regime. And then for us, who again, yes, we're concerned about the way the world is going. We're concerned about the way our country is going. We see all of the things that happen, but maybe it's not as stark as it, or maybe it doesn't feel as stark as it did for Bonhoeffer and for those in Germany at the time. Uh, but no, but nonetheless, there's still good lessons to be thinking about, even when things are peaceful. Okay, what does it really mean to be a disciple of Christ? What is the cost? What can we understand from, from a very intense and detailed reading of Scripture, of the gospel in particular, of how we're to act in the world, day in and day out. What does it look like? To be a true disciple of Christ. And so, and so that is the backdrop that we kind of have to keep in mind, at least when dealing with Bonhoeffer on Bonhoeffer's terms during his time. Of course, our conversation expands for us in our time, and in terms of how we view what's happening in the world. Where is the pressure that we feel as believers, as members of the body of Christ, to make response to the things that we see, and that's always been a challenge for Christians. Is how do we, as Paul, I believe it is First Corinthians or maybe Romans says, be in the world and not of it. No, that's Jesus. I'm sorry, it's Jesus' disciple. Sorry. Um, but there's this sense of that we have one foot in this world solidly, and then one foot in another world that isn't hasn't quite taken shape. We're and working toward it coming. We trust that it is coming, but it's still not here. And so how do we navigate that? And so again, Bonhoeffer and the Cause for Discipleship, in a different context, but with the same questions about what do Christians do in the world, vis-a-vis the things that we see going on. Um, and again, as he started the book, not siding with his cheap grace, it just kind of says, go along to get along, keep doing what you usually do, working under your own will, and asking God to kind of sanctify what the choices are that you've made. But before you make the choices, following Jesus, or when you're making the choices, not being too wedded to them if you realize or find out or it's revealed to you that that wasn't the choice that was the right one for you. It might have been a good choice for other people who are called and have a particular path to follow, but it might not have been your correct path. And so, or my correct path. So we're always struggling with discerning how it is that we as individuals are to follow Christ, what we are to do. But then, of course, then collectively, what is the church or individual parishes? What is their calling out that they discern? So, okay. Thank you all for those questions and comments. We should probably push forward into chapter 5, unless there's um, something burning that folks wanted to mention.
So that's the unexpected things and not what you choose.
Yeah, to a certain extent, right. I mean, it's a very
Except what is not chosen, but like something that comes to you without
hmm
your input knowledge or whatever, and
hmm
work through that.
right. Yeah. I mean, and maybe it's not as so much without your input or knowledge, but it's that you have,
Unexpected. Something
yeah, yeah,
happens, you work through it.
right, right. Not the way you would have chosen to go. Yeah.
Right, that's what they say here.
Yep, yep, yep. Exactly. Exactly. Mhm. Okay.
Not the unexpected.
hmm
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So if we move into chapter 5, um, we have discipleship in the individual, and we've touched on some of the themes that are in this chapter already, but as we go through it, you'll see, you know, where it resonates with what has come before, but also some of the new area that it's pushing as we get into chapter 6, which is kind of this very extended discussion of the Sermon on the Mount. So, as Bonhoeffer has in previous chapters, he begins with a scriptural attestation from from the gospel, this time from the 14th chapter of Luke. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself cannot be my disciple. Whew, that's a tough one. I used to this used to keep me up at night when I was little. I couldn't place it. It didn't, I was like, well, how are you going to tell me, God, that if I want to follow you, I have to hate all these people that I love? All these people that you have told me in other places, in Ten Commandments, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the earth. So now, how are you coming here, Jesus, and telling me I had to hate them all? Um, and and so it was a struggle. Whenever this came up or whenever I came across it in reading, and even kind of how do you apply this? I mean, what does this look like? What I mean, surely Jesus can't mean that you're supposed to hate them. I mean, what is this? What are we talking about here? Um, so then, in the next sentence, Jesus is called to discipleship, makes a disciple into a single individual. So now you have this kind of isolating piece. Um, you talked about the communal piece here at the end of chapter 4, and now Bonhoeffer is saying, but there's an intensely personal and intensely individual aspect to this following of Jesus. Um, whether disciples want to or not, they have to make a decision now, and each one has to decide alone. And this is where your as you were saying, Miss Gaskin, um, this is where your agency comes in, when your intellect comes in, where your choice comes in, your agency to say yes to Jesus. And then once you say that, um, you've essentially taken an oath to now, okay, I'm going to follow Jesus. And so, my will is subverted to God's will in Jesus. Um, the thoughts that I have, I offer to Jesus. The guidance, the direction, the steps, the actions, the attention that I pay, whatever the case is governed by God's will in Jesus. And so that's an intensely individual and intensely personal question and answer. And it is, and it's intended to be that way between us and Jesus, so that our commitment is is not to anything else or anyone else but to Jesus. And in that context, you can begin to see a little bit of what Jesus was getting at. And it's not that you hate anything or anyone, but your allegiance to them begins to fade as your allegiance to Christ begins to grow. Um, and so um, you've got a real choice to make. And you weigh the cost. We've seen it already in previous chapters. Or there are questions to be asked and things to consider, but ultimately, it's yes, Jesus, I will go. I will go exactly when you tell me to go. I will do exactly what you tell me to do because I want so desperately to be with you. And the greatest joy of my existence is to be with you, to hear what you say, to do it, but really much, much, much more is just simply being in Jesus' presence, simply being there, to feel, the power of God, the presence of God, the peace of God, the love of God, to feel that, we have to be close to Jesus, and that becomes our sole purpose, our sole reason for existing, as to be in Jesus' presence, and then ultimately to worship God through our obedience to Christ. Um, And so, so this intensely personal individual, um, each is called alone. Christ intends to make the human being lonely, and as individuals, they should see nothing except Him who called them. So, so it's in this isolation, this intensely personal connection with Jesus, like Jesus standing before us and saying, "Follow me," and looking into our eyes, and us looking into Jesus's eyes and saying, "Yes," or looking away and saying, "No, I'm not ready." I mean, we do have that very profound choice there to say yes or no. But again, it's intended, Bonhoeffer says, to be intensely personal, to be isolating in a sense, at least for the sake of that conversation, because again, our focus is on Jesus and Jesus, and we'd be tempted to. We would probably struggle more if it was, this kind of understanding of, of a corporate call, which there are aspects of that, but in terms of our relationship with Jesus, it is intensely personal, and it is a direct one-to-one conversation. Um, um, the second to last sentence in the first full paragraph at the top of page 60. No one can follow Christ without recognizing and affirming that break is already complete. So this break with our immediate connections, not a caprice of a self-willed life, but Christ Himself leads His disciples such a break. So um, in my own history, there have been those that have said, "God has called me, therefore I'm going away." um, to another area, leaving a job, whatever the case. Not my personal experience, but in within my family structure. Um, and and it was said in such a way as almost to be that you couldn't argue. God has said this, therefore I must go. But it always had, at least in situations I've known, there's always been this tenor of, I have made this decision. This is my decision to do this for God. And Bonhoeffer would say, and I think I would agree, that that's not really discipleship. That's you or that individual saying, I'm going to do this of my own accord because, I mean, sure, the person believed that they had a particular call that was calling them to go to leave their immediate environs, their immediate connections, and go. Um, but if it again, it's a very, very fine line. It's very, very nuanced and very detailed and delicate, understanding. But if that call is somehow tied to this is what I want to do because I want to um, you know, be that kind of a person that, that can go away at a whim, on a whim and follow Jesus or whatever the motivation is. If it's not to obey the fact that Christ has said it, um, then again, for Bonhoeffer, it's not discipleship. You're not really being a disciple because you're not following what Jesus is asking you specifically to do. You're going off on your own. And oftentimes, I think that for many of us as Christians, we can perceive a good thing and we can go and do it. And we uh, don't receive the response that we think we would have, or even that we've seen other people have. Um, we don't really fulfill doing that thing, and so now we're looking for the next thing and the next thing. Um, Oftentimes that can be an indication that we went to do this good thing, but it wasn't God's will for us to do this good thing, or it wasn't in God's timing for us to do this thing. And when we make that mistake, sometimes it's, a mistake that we make just because we don't know. Sometimes we do it willfully. Then we get, if we're discerning, if we're paying attention, then we get messages about, oh, wait a minute, this isn't really what God wanted me to do. And God forbid that we go and we do it successfully and it's working out. And so we figure because it's working out, we're doing it successfully, that okay, clearly God has smiled on this. And then we realize later on, through various ways that, oh, wait a minute, I was just happy that it was working, but that really wasn't God's will for me. And so, again, this intensely personal, intensely individual, this isolating conversation between us and Jesus, to reduce the noise around us, to reduce us comparing to what that person's doing over there, or what this person did before, or what our grand plans are for the future, and just focusing on, I said, follow me, Jesus is saying. And we say, yes, I will follow you. And then we obey what Jesus is saying to us, or are telling us needs to be done. Um, so toward the bottom of the page, well, starting actually in that second full paragraph and going through to the next page, um, you know, Bonhoeffer is talking about how Jesus is in the middle and stands between us and everything else, us in the world, us in our relationships, us in everything. Jesus is there, and in some ways, it kind of the image that I get is that he looms large enough to block out our vision of anything else. Uh, so we can think back to when we were little, and a big person, a parent, a bigger sibling, a relative, or somebody who is really big, walks up and stands over us and fills our whole field of vision. We can't see anything else. And that's kind of this, that Jesus stands before us and doesn't overwhelm us in a scary sense, but he's there, he's close, and when we look up, that's all we see because Jesus wants us to focus on him, and so he blocks out some of these other things. Well, all of these other things, really. He makes it so intense that we are the only two beings, in the entire world at least in that moment, because Jesus wants us to focus on him, and such that we are not only captivated but are reminded of just how good Jesus is. And so toward the bottom of 60, he stands not only between me and God, he also stands between me and the world, between me and other people and things. He is the mediator, not only between God and human beings, but also between person and person, and between person and reality. So Jesus is the mediator that stands between us, um, and all of the things that with which we're connected. You may remember, I guess this was a couple of years ago now. This is kind of echoes, what people like Meister Eckhart, Teresa of Avila, and other mystics in this vein have talked about, that there is this kind of cutting off from all stimuli. We cease to think. Our self is caught up in the fullness of God. And so, this is a similar description of that, with Jesus being the mediator, standing between all of these various and sundry other connections, and potential distractions and temptations, to say, I am here. I am the one. I am the mediator. I am the person, the being that is should receive your fullest attention, or really your only attention, really. Um, um, and so this is it. Not only is it isolating, it's a little bit off-putting. That okay, well, wait a minute. I thought Jesus was here to connect me to the world more fully, connect me to the people more fully. And Bonhoeffer is saying no, that's not the case because it's through Christ that we have the most fundamental and the most powerful connections. The connections we have, though they're lovely, intimate, satisfying, beautiful, good in all the ways that you can think of them. They're still not as powerful, not as good, not as satisfying, not as real as the connection that we have with all of the world, all of our interactions that we have through Christ. Um, and so Christ is that presence that really makes everything takes it to the level that it's intended to be. And so Jesus's call, to the extent that it is understood not as an ideal, but as the word of the mediator, brings about this accomplished break with the world in me. So this is he's saying this is similar to our worship of Jesus as the ideal person, the ideal human, the ideal mixture of divine and earth, divine substance and earthly substance, as this ideal, but it's not really that. It's Jesus himself. It's the word of the mediator. It's the essence of the mediator. That when we commit to that serves to break this connection with the world. And then once the connection with the world is broken under our own power, then we are connected in a more powerful way through Jesus. And that connection serves God in the way that it was intended. So it's Jesus as the mediator provides a truer link to all. So we don't have this individual conversation with Jesus, this isolating conversation with Jesus, to now be isolated, kind of lone rangers. But we are now connected again more fully through Jesus as the Word of God, and that connection with Jesus then separates or severs the previous connections, but again, only to be reconnected in a more powerful way. So there is some kind of thought, I think, in kind of these call stories and in obedience to Jesus, that somehow, and we see it in the desert mothers and fathers, that somehow being isolated and away from people is the way to be with God. And as the desert fathers and mothers and fathers discovered, that going into a hermitage, going out into the wilderness to be away from people and the temptations of human interaction, um, actually increases and intensifies those connections. So you might be in your hermitage in the Egyptian desert, but people are going to come find you because they have a need to be connected to God through you, as the hermit, as the mystic. And so similarly, Jesus comes and we have a desire to be connected to God and through the world, through and to the world through Him. Not of our own volition, not of our own abilities, but through Christ. So we have the real connection that God intended. Um, okay. Any thoughts, questions?
Having read the passage, the chapters, Father, I felt that this is a lone journey,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's encouraged to work in groups.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a journey that you have to really be prepared for and inhale and accept.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I mean, there definitely is that aspect of the loneliness,
Right.
for sure. Um, but again, I think that piece can go away. Not always. I mean, because I think some of us are called uh, to to be in the world for the sake of the gospel in in a more individual way. But again, that's based on what God requires of us. For others, we have this individual connection with God to answer Jesus' call. But then now we're led back into, or commanded to go back into, to a different relationship. We're still related, we're still connected, we're not isolated or alone, but we're connected differently because of Christ. And
Mm-hmm.
so the same relationships that we had. Um, might still look the same in a lot of ways, but they're fundamentally different because we're in this relationship connected through Christ, and that's a fundamental difference, I guess.
Thank you.
Hmm. Thank you. Mhm. Um, and so, kind of the way Bonhoeffer explains is, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That last sentence of the first the first part where it says other gods and the world want to tear away from Christ what he deprived them of, namely the ability to relate immediately to human persons.
Hmm.
And prior to that, it says that Christ is the only mediator.
Hmm. Right. Right. So, I mean, I think what Bonhoeffer is saying is there is that, the temptations of the world would say you need to be able to uh, connect directly, or as he would say here, immediately to others.
Or
But
they want to connect to us,
Mhm. Right, right.
and we should not follow.
Hmm. Right,
Only to Christ we should be following.
right.
Is he
Exactly.
the mediator?
Hmm. Exactly. And then I think, let me see, where is it? Um, And so if you flip over to 62, Bonhoeffer kind of addresses this, where he says, ever since Jesus called, there are no longer natural, historical, or experiential, unmediated relationships for his disciples. Christ the mediator stands between son and father, between husband and wife, between individual and nation, whether they can recognize him or not. So, so all of these connections don't go away per se, but now Christ is in the middle of them. So again, we're interacting not of our own will or not of the immediacy of the need for the interaction, but we're interacting through Christ. And then again, that's uh, a choice that we have made to follow Jesus, and now to have our relationships mediated through him. Um, and and so it's kind of, in some ways it's weird to think, that Jesus is in between us and all of these interactions, but it's more. I mean, you can kind of think of it like a lens, that Jesus is now the lens over our eyes, that help us to see more clearly, um, or that is the conduit, so to speak, between us and really and in the world, that protects us from from connecting in a way that that takes our focus off of Jesus. So that and he also goes on to say that for for a disciple of Jesus, quote unquote, God-given realities exist only through Jesus Christ. So again, really driving home this point that when we say yes to Jesus, Jesus really does become our all in all. And so every interaction, every thought, every action, every plan is mediated through Jesus, and ultimately is because is Jesus's instruction for us to do. And so when we're relating to people through Jesus, then uh, we have the assurance, that our relationship is in a right is in a right frame. That our relationship is going to not simply serve us as the individuals that are in the relationship, but is ultimately going to serve God and keep us close to Jesus, even draw us even closer, because it's the frequency is correct, the connection is right. All of this is focused on obeying God and of staying in the midst of God's will. Um, so mm,
Every other way is a delusion.
yeah, yeah, that's yes, ma'am. That's what Bonhoeffer would say. And frankly, he's in solidly in a very strong tradition of Christian mystics that they're really trying to apply this kind of very esoteric, spiritual, understanding of the world to kind of the
But
concrete.
in a lookout forum,
Hmm.
it's in a lookout forum as that you have to look out for these things.
Uh-huh. Right. Yep. Yep. You have to be very aware. Yep. Exactly.
Right.
Hmm. Yes, Miss Caesar. Thank you, Miss Curtis. Thank you, Miss Cass. Okay, we've
Thank
got
you.
two
2 minutes.
minutes until Compline. So,
No,
um,
sorry. I
mhm.
was saying I was contemplating and thinking hard about everything that's being said, and I've come to the conclusion that, and this is something that it's commonly said all the time. In everything we do, you know, let it be in the name of Jesus and
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Let Jesus be there first.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think this is basically what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. So we have come to the end of our time again. Thank you, as always, for your time, attention, your contributions. Compline will begin now in about a minute, and we'll look forward. We'll start on page 63, and we'll really push through the rest of 5 next week, and then get into chapter 6, because I said, chapter 6 makes up the bulk of the book, from page 69 to page 156. So we'll be in that for a while, but we'll look forward to next week. And if you haven't read the Sermon on the Mount in a while, you could read that as preparation for our discussion that will come toward the end of next week. All right, Matthew 5. All right, thank you all very much. Welcome to those who are here for our